All right. Good morning, Doug. We're here with some Q&A with lots of great questions from people. First one starts off with something related to Biden's vaccine mandate speech from yesterday. He says, I want to draw a line in the sand somewhere, i.e. if X happens, then far more sinister things are soon to follow, and it would be wise to get out of the US. I've settled on either a national mandate for all working citizens or any form of restriction on interstate travel. Would this be a wise move? And if I do leave, should I plan on staying gone, or would things improve with the next election, as people have been saying for the last 50 years?
Yeah, okay. In Rhodesia, they called it the chicken run, where as late as the mid 1970s, there were about 250,000 people of European extraction living in what is now called Zimbabwe. It was then called Rhodesia. And there were about 3.5 or 4 million, Black people that were living there, primarily from two tribes who didn't like each other, incidentally. Anyway, the smart white people were talking about making the chicken run and going elsewhere. And other people who turned out to be not so smart were going to stay there and fight it out. Well, guess who won? Right now, there's about, I don't know, I'm not sure anybody knows, but let me guess. There's maybe 5,000 or 10,000 tops European descent people left in Zimbabwe. And there's about, it's gone up from about 3 million back then to about 15 million, Shona, and what's the other tribe? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So sometimes when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and you leave. On the other hand, look at Germany. I mean, talk about a tumultuous place. I mean, after they lost World War I, and then the turbulence in the 20s, and then the 30s with the Nazis, and then the 40s with World War II. But, it's still Germany, even though it's being overwhelmed by migrants from all kinds of weird places.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is what we're going through just an aberration in American history, or have we reached a tipping point? And I could make a good argument both ways, actually. But, for the next 4 years, while these genuine Bolsheviks are in office, and I think they're going to cement themselves in office. I really do. The Republicans, not that they're much better, I think they can forget about it. What's going to happen, though, when the Republicans try to evict them, and they, things are just going to get kind of wild and woolly here in the U.S. So I guess I'm going to be spending more time outside of the U.S. because I don't want to get involved in a national street fight, as it were. Partially because I'm too old for that kind of shit. It's like the idea of being a street fighting man, yeah, that's got a certain charm and appeal. But and I love the song, but I'm not interested in it at this stage of my life. So yeah, I'm going to go to quieter climes and just see what happens.
Okay.
But I'm in a position to do that. I've got lots of money and lots of connections and experience around the world, and bop. But the writer, I don't know. What are you going to do? Put a backpack on and walk off to Mexico? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously having resources makes a big difference. But one of the things I do like about his question is he's trying to find what the line in the sand is for himself, and maybe his family. And I think it's really important to know when it's been crossed, for you, because I think that lack of clarity about it, we're being there's this whole study of manipulation of humans, basically called behavioral economics. And what it does is it nudges people, it nudges them in directions. And so once you start, you kind of go with the flow, and then you find yourself a year later unsure how you ended up making the set of decisions you made. And I think the important way to not be fooled by that is to have a line in the sand, or just say, like, this is something I'm not going to do. Even if it's going to cause me difficulty, I'm just not going to do this. And whether that's the point where you leave or the US, if you can or not, I think is a different question. But having that line is critical, I think.
Yeah, it probably is. Otherwise, you can keep getting pushed further and further and further. And it's a frog in the boiling water
Exactly.
Situation. Although, and I've got to check this out, I understand that the frog in a boiling water analogy is not a good one, because frogs, when it gets warm enough, actually do jump out. So they're all, when they've tested these things, almost no frogs are actually boiled. They jump out at some point.
Maybe they keep a lid on the pot.
Maybe. And the U.S. government is certainly capable of putting a lid on this pot. This
Exactly.
Cooker. In other words, it can turn it into a pressure cooker.
Well, exactly.
Doing.
Well, and you look at what changed in the last 2 years, things that we never imagined would have changed, like our ability to travel freely around the world. We had one of the best as Americans, you have one of the best passports in the world. That's no longer true. No. And restrictions on movement have increased. And while there were calls yesterday from the more extreme side of things, saying that Biden's plan didn't go far enough with its mandates, and in fact, they needed to mandate that you needed vaccines for interstate travel. And to me, that's going to happen. I think it's clear it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
Look what's happened to Australia. I mean, they're quite serious about not being able to go more than, 2, 3, 5 miles from your house.
That's right.
It's shocking. And I think there are things of that nature in parts of Canada too now.
That's right. And I think this is a slow rolling thing. And I was happy that Biden's mandates weren't more extreme than they were, although they are really unprecedented. I mean, any employer, if I had 100 employees today I would have 99. I would there's just no chance, that I would. I'm not going to follow. I mean, these mandates are crazy, but it's really going to be hard. I think most people are going to roll over on them, honestly. And I guess we don't need to go into what they are, because people can look it up elsewhere. But it's pretty crazy. So let's see. Next question. It says, "Hi, Doug. These videos are like the life lessons I never had. So thank you. How long does America have before the financial system collapses?"
I guess I'm the wrong person to ask. Because I think it should have collapsed. Should is always a dangerous word. I mean, look, it should have collapsed back in the early 1980s. But the fact is that it didn't collapse back in the 1980s. Things were still resilient enough. And you've got to remember that for the last 40 years, interest rates have been headed down, down, down. And especially in a highly indebted society, low interest rates make things much more affordable. And there's a lot of capital that has been accumulated in the United States over a couple centuries. And when you consume more through borrowing, it means you're basically living out of capital. So we've got a lot of capital that we can live out of. So I guess the answer to the question is what are things going to really collapse this time around? And even since the last real crisis, they've papered this thing up pretty good. It's not just lower interest rates, but they've created tons of money, trillions of dollars of money, and things have still hung together more or less. stock markets at highs, bond markets at hyper highs, real estate markets doing just fine. You know, and they say anybody. So it looks pretty good. It's the Greater Depression, when you walk outside and go down to the store, doesn't seem to be here yet.
No, it doesn't. Actually, that's when somebody asked that question directly. It says, they say, are we officially out of the quote eye of the storm? Because you've used this hurricane metaphor for years, saying that the greater financial crisis was just the first side of it, and that we were in the eye, and the worst side of it, the worst half of it, was yet to come. Yeah,
well, I guess if you're going to predict, you have to prepare to be wrong. But I don't think. Look, what's that joke? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But, look, I'm trying to analyze things as I see them, and cause has effect. And the cause, this thousands of millions and billions, thousands of billions of dollars that have been created, and the other distortions the government's created in the society, what will be the effect of this? Will it be a utopia where none of us, in fact, have to work, and the government just sends us a check and we can spend the day down at Starbucks on our iPhones, idling time away? I don't think so. I think we're actually part of history. So being off by a couple of years doesn't bother me. Check back with me in a year. If things still look in a year like they look today, I'll have to say, you know what? I'm going to have to rethink the idea of a free market and personal freedom and individuality and Western values. I'm going to have to rethink all of this stuff and maybe convert to diehard Marxism at this point. So.
Well, I won't hold my breath for that. But you did say when we were in Mexico together earlier this year, I think Kiyosaki, I think, asked you, he said, when does it fall apart? Like when do things really go bad? And you said, well, anytime between tomorrow morning and this time next year. And your answer was just so straightforward and shocking to me, actually, that I was like, holy crap, that seems like that seems correct. You know, and I had to update my own thinking in terms of timeframes because of it. Do you still basically buy into that idea?
Yeah, I do. I really think they've actually pushed it up to the edge at this point.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard. It's hard to make these short-term predictions when you look at the long-term trend of history in this country and other places and so forth. So yeah, I'm prepared to be wrong, but we were in Mexico when? In May?
Yeah, April or May, I think. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's revisit that in April of 2022.
All right, sounds good. So
I mean, listen, I genuinely hope I'm wrong, because, as I said before, I really prefer good times to bad times, and I'll take completely phony, artificial good times to very real bad times. And it was fun talking to Robert, to Kiyosaki about this, because, you know, he's been very successful, and but he also feels the same way. I mean, he's a bear, seeing that all this is going to fall apart, and we're all wondering, you know, how long is this dream world going to last? Okay, so I'll say I'll give it 8 months from where we stand, and I hope I'm wrong.
I hope you're wrong too, but the economic situation isn't the only part, and I imagine when you were thinking of the hurricane, being in the eye and the tail end, you probably weren't thinking about this almost authoritarian state that has emerged during this time period. So while the economic situation is pretty rosy, you have this whole other side of things where individual freedoms and are certainly under attack.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, science fiction is our best predictor of what's going to happen. Not the blathering of some think tanks in Washington. Science fiction it's just too weird and too gloomy to believe, but it's usually right. So I'll go for the weird and gloomy side of things in the future.
Well, speaking of books, someone asks, we know Doug's taste in literature and cinema, but rarely does Doug talk about his musical tastes. Now, we do know that he likes Street Fighting Man from the Stones, but who are some of Doug's favorite bands?
Okay. Early favorite band, Beach Boys. Love the Beach Boys. And they were subscribers to my letter way back when. And actually,
Really?
one of the advantages of publication that people like is the Beach Boys all came over to my house. I had a great place in Vancouver on the water, and we had a salmon barbecue one time when they were giving a concert in Vancouver. So it was a highlight of my life because they were my first favorite band, and there they are. We're having a barbecue together.
How fantastic!
Yeah, well, it was wonderful. Never was a big fan of the Beatles, but I was an early and rabid fan of the Rolling Stones. Still am. All of the Rolling Stones, almost all of the Rolling Stones songs are just great. Dire Straits, huge fan of Dire Straits. Almost all their stuff is great. But who am I forgetting? Well, listen, when I went through my, I've got a bunch of songs downloaded on my computer. And, when you play them, it tells you how many times you played them. It just automatically racks these things up. So you know who is number one as most played artist? Was Nina Simone.
Well, you have talked about Nina Simone before. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me. She's fantastic. It's hard to compare anyone with her.
She sings My Way better than Frank Sinatra does, for instance. Yep. So, but God, who else is up there? It kind of catches me unaware. I'd have to. But I love classical music too. I love things like Bach and Beethoven and Wagner.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, let's see. What was the purchasing power of silver in ancient history, medieval times, in the early 1900s, or at other interesting points in history? Could it ever again play a role as money for people in daily life?
That's an interesting question. My understanding is that the first comparison that we have that's reasonably accurate between gold and silver dates back to Pharaonic Egypt, 2000 BC. And at that point, silver, an ounce of silver was worth an ounce of gold was worth about 2.5 ounces of silver. So the famous gold-silver ratio back then, we understand, was about 2.5 to 1. And then, of course, people thought it was a cosmic constant, that it was going to be fixed at 17 to 1 or whatever it is that the US government fixed it at, which was stupid. And since then, it's ranged up to 100 to 1. What is it now? 70 to 1, something like that. I don't know. It doesn't matter. So, you've had people that have made the argument that silver was like the true cross. It was a magic element. And, I understand the pluses of silver and all this. Wonderful element, but just one of 92 naturally occurring elements is all it is. So the answer to the question is, I don't know. Nobody knows what the market will designate as being money. Maybe, Bitcoin will largely replace gold in the future. Depends on what kind of world we live in. But listen, I'm long a lot of silver right now. I'm long a lot of gold. Silver seems like a better speculative element. Why? Because it's a much smaller market than gold, much smaller market. And there aren't inventories of silver the way there are of gold. Gold is hoarded everywhere. But silver is an industrial metal, not hoarded. But when there's a monetary crisis, it becomes the secondary monetary metal, and everybody piles into it. So, yeah, I'm a real bull on silver right now. But for the long term, no, gold really. Besides, it takes too much silver to be worth anything, even at $25 an ounce, frankly, just because the dollar's not worth shit anymore.
Exactly. Have you ever heard of this guy named Dan Pena? And if so, what do you have any thoughts on him?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, good. All right. I know Doug isn't prone to conspiracy, but has he ever watched any Corbett report documentaries on things like World War I or how big oil conquered the world? He says these are well-researched source documentaries explaining these conspiracies to change the world, decades long in some cases.
Well, Matt, we've talked about this before. And although what's going on today, all this COVID nonsense, it does seem like a conspiracy. I mean, it's almost uncanny. But on the other hand, as I pointed out numerous times, it's hard enough to form a conspiracy among four guys as far as which movie to go to and then what restaurant after the movie on a given night. So the answer to the question is no, don't really know.
Okay. I'm going to send you one on his on World War I, just because I'm interested in your thoughts on it. Because it starts off talking about Cecil Rhodes, and it's interesting, the connections that he draws, and it's well researched, and he's a thoughtful human. I don't think he's a very he's not a tinfoil hat guy. So, but I'll share it with you, and then we'll see what your thoughts are.
No, you can maybe you can make an argument for it that's pretty good, because World War I itself was so incredibly stupid. I mean,
never should have happened. There's no justification for it. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Let's see. What's the first thing that Doug notices when traveling to a new place, a country or a part of a country? For example, is it construction, the types of businesses along the roads, types of cars that people drive, behavior of the people, police, level of wealth versus poverty, air pollution, cleanliness, etc.? Is there something that stands out to you?
Well, all of the above, actually. Yeah. Sure.
Is there anything is there anything
in particular other than the things you just laying, all of which are important, somewhat obvious, but important? No, I can't think of anything really.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out for me that basically I think the way I've done it is, rather than having a checklist, it's almost like a pattern recognition. It's like, this feels like this other place, and then I try and I form like a hypothesis, and then I look for the differences between those places. You know what I mean? So like when I went to Santiago for the first time, go in this one specific neighborhood, which is very nice, and there's something that doesn't fit. There's one thing that it was very nice, but there was one thing that didn't fit for a Latin American country, and that was that there were people pushing children, babies, in strollers. Now, that doesn't happen anywhere in Latin America. Why? Because the sidewalks are all broken and shitty and unusable.
Interesting.
So it's just like there's something like I was pushing my own kids. I had this like off-road stroller almost to push my kids through the streets or through the around Buenos Aires, but you didn't find it elsewhere in Latin America, except for this one particular neighbor in Chile. But
well, that is interesting, and there is another point I would make along those lines. It's that getting a general impression from like driving or walking through a neighborhood, that's one thing. But another thing is just staking out a place and watching a particular site for an hour to see what happens. And the reason that I bring that up is that it was fascinating that I was in the Cameroon, and it has two capitals. One's the economic capital, one's the political capital. Which one was this? Doesn't matter. For some reason, I had to stay outside this building. Why? I don't know. So it turns out that my car was parked right outside one of these, dumpsters, like you see these big dumpsters at the trash company. So that was the only thing to really watch. And I was just watching the dumpster. And about every couple of minutes, like clockwork, there'd be some bum or some citizen or somebody who would come by and drop something in the dumpster, and then somebody else would take something out of the dumpster. And it wasn't like a drug drop or anything like that. It was like a watering hole out in the savannah or the jungle, where it's where everybody, knew there was stuff that you needed, and they congregate. And this is a very poor place, and the people are very poor. So I'm just watching these poor people drop shit into the dumpster and take stuff out of the dumpster. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating and gave me a slice of Cameroonese life that way. So I don't know. So that and $10 will get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But
it's good.
Did I learn anything? Well, it was how degraded things were in Cameroon at that time, and I'm sure they're not much better. And so, in fact, that leads me, Matt. When we last talked, which was about 10 days ago, actually, we haven't talked for a week. I think one question was, well, what book are you going to read tomorrow or the next day or something like that? And the fact is, there'd been a book I bought 20 years ago called, I got the book, where the hell is that book now? Anyway, it's like, I can find it if I get up and go rooting over there. It's How Can Africa Survive? Was the title of the book, written in about the year 2000 by a woman, can't remember her name. Anyway, so I read through the book quickly, and it was a surprising book, where there was somebody who was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and who had Robert S. McNamara, of all people, write an endorsement on the back of the book. And basically, she's making the point that Africa is going nowhere. Now, she doesn't hit all the reasons right and so forth, but I read it and I said, this is amazing. So then I looked this woman up on the internet, and after the launch of this book, she disappears. It's like, why did they publish this book? And then you don't hear anything more about this book, saying that basically Africa's a shithole and it's going nowhere. And I say that as somebody that recommends young people go to Africa. Anyway, so that was the book that I read the next day.
I'm going to look that one up. I've definitely not heard of that.
I can get the exact address. I have it. We'll have it over there. Where did that thing go? Anyway, I can find it.
It's okay. Yeah, if you send it to me later, I can post it, in the description to the video, so people can find it that way.
Not a recommendation. I just thought it was odd that anybody who's apparently well connected would write a book saying that Africa is not going to make it, and it won't. If foreign aid and foreign investment were withdrawn from Africa, I'm afraid it's going to collapse, just like South Africa itself. South Africa is collapsing right now.
Well, and with the economic strain that's been caused by the COVID hysteria, you have to imagine some of that foreign aid has got to dry up. That's got it. Certainly the foreign investment. I mean, it has to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Does Doug think the average person has an inherent distrust of wealth because fiat currency is no longer necessarily an outward sign of inward grace, and can equally be a sign of how politically connected and corrupt an individual is?
Yeah, I'm afraid that the average individual is oriented towards socialism, quite frankly, because people tend to follow the terms of their early youth indoctrination. And frankly, a family is a socialist organization where there's a head, usually a male, although that's changing, that gives the orders and everybody else follows the orders, and allowances come from them and duties come from them. So a family is like a tiny little socialist state. And, we all say the family is wonderful and, it's the basis of civilization. Okay, that's all true. But there's a certain element in the family that gets people off on the wrong foot, thinking that there's a head and he dispenses punishments and favors. So it's like a little state. And then, of course, you go into the next. So based on that, the fact that we really do want and need a family because of the good things that it has. Well, what it doesn't have is parents that, while they're providing the good and necessary things of a family, aren't simultaneously indoctrinating their kids with free market and capitalist values. Saying, yes, I'm giving you an allowance now, but I want you to understand, why that is, and you should earn it. And how about next week, if you like some more,
Yes.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't go on. That doesn't go on. I think that's left to teachers today to, explain economics and the way the world works to kids more than parents. So I'm not very optimistic.
I'm not optimistic about it either, but I do think that people, I agree with you, that most people, seeing the way that wealth is created by, a bunch of finance bros who work at Goldman and then become rich by the time they're 25, and just seeing that their own money, there's the incentives for savings aren't there. I mean, they're just the whole fundamentally screwed up fiat money system does seem to cause bad behaviors. I mean, no matter what, like it just encourages all the wrong things. It encourages debt.
Yeah, it does. And incidentally, in the evening, I've gotten very involved in this series, The Man in the High Castle. Did you say you watched that?
Yep, I've seen. I think maybe I haven't seen the last season, but I've seen a couple of them.
I've just embarked upon the third season, and one of the things I thought was most interesting about it, other than that, it's a very well done show, is that it basically projects the U.S. having been conquered by Japan and Germany, and the U.S. is more or less divided between the two of them. And Americans are living in a police state, Japanese police state and a German police state. And it's just fascinating. I mean, Philip K. Dick, I find his books are unreadable, quite frankly, but they're all, for some reason, turned into great movies, like Blade Runner was one of them. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Anyway, I think one of the interesting things about this is that how easily it's projected that Americans pretty much adopt the values of the Reich. Not so much on the West Coast where the Japanese have taken over, because there it's kind of a racial thing. So
right.
Americans don't adopt it quite as easily because the Japanese are more alien. The Germans, well, they're just like us, except they wear black uniforms. And now we can wear black uniforms too. So we'll be good little Nazis.
Well,
anyway,
I think that's we're kind of seeing that right now.
We are, exactly. And I expect that, any of my neighbors in this country, should I get to know them, which I'm not planning on, incidentally, I mean, that would just offer them up as an additional source of danger once I open my mouth and they figure that, gotta watch this guy. Sadly, but necessarily, I'm going to have to leave the U.S. and go back to my eyrie in Uruguay and Argentina.
Well, I think that you'll be just fine, and you can make that work and make it entertaining for yourself along the way. The next question here is, this guy says, I'm 2 years shy of retirement, but I'll quit and retire early the day I'm told I must get vaccinated, which is coming. I don't know if this was, what day was this? I'm not sure if this was before Biden's speech or not, but he says, I can't get my pension or Social Security for 2 years, and who knows if they'll even be there in 2 years, especially for the unvaccinated. With only about $500K in a taxable IRA, would you recommend going to find peace, freedom, and a beach? I have thought about Sicily, Turkey, Montenegro, Croatia, and Morocco.
500K is, in fact, enough to retire on. And yeah, you just want to go someplace that's mellow. You know, you can travel, you can still travel insofar as you can travel pretty cheaply and look around and find someplace and then figure out what you're going to do to amuse yourself and how you're going to overcome the language problem, things of that nature. But listen, I've got to compliment whoever wrote that letter, because the fact is, if everybody said, well, screw you. I'm, you know, this is the last line where you're telling me I've got to do something with my own body, take an injection, I'm quitting. And if everybody quit, I mean, okay, now that throws the ball in their court. Say, okay, call my bluff. Now what are you going to do?
That's right. That's right. I agree 100%. And I think that's where people, you know, if they draw the line there, if they're at the point where they've decided against the vaccination, and then now they're being coerced and they go along with it, it just really shows that it wasn't really like an ethical standard on their part. It was they liked the idea of it, but it was really just a matter of convenience. And as soon as the convenience was eroded away, meaning that they might suffer some consequence for their ethics, then they abandon them. So I agree. Like this guy, I love that approach. I mean, that's the way it ought to be.
Yeah, it really is. I like somebody that not doesn't just talk the talk, but walks the walk, especially somebody who's got severe inconvenience. That's something really to lose by walking away where he is. So yeah, keep us posted. I'd like to know what happens.
Okay, so next question here is, let's see. What is your opinion on investing in real estate private placement funds for accredited investors with long track records or meeting or exceeding returns of 15 to 25% annualized or greater?
You know, real estate has been very, very good to me over the years. It really has. I mean, real estate's really been good to me, but I just can't make myself into a real estate bull in most places. Now, why is that? It's that I understand these marvelous track records that some places can have, but you know, maybe a real estate fund has a great long-term track record because they were perfectly oriented for the world as it was. Well, is the world going to change radically? Well, I think it is. I think we're at one of those great turning points. So I'm not sure I'd rely so much on a great long-term track record, for one thing. And here's something to bear in mind. It's that state and local governments, primarily, their income is mainly real estate taxes. And you can't hide real estate. And real estate taxes have gone up tremendously in the US from when they didn't exist at all 100 years ago. So now you've got to pay, like in many places, 2% or something like that of the market value of your house every year just to continue owning your house. So you've got that working against you. You've got the fact that real estate floats on a sea of debt. And generally speaking, if you can't borrow money, you can't buy and you can't sell real estate. It's all on a debt market, mortgage market. And right now with mortgage rates in the 2.5%, 3.5% area, someplace in there, real estate is more affordable than ever. But I've got news for you. Interest rates are going to go up. I don't care what the Fed does. At some point, they're going to go way up. And that's not going to be good for real estate. Well, maybe everybody will pile into real estate to get out of dollars. Yeah, there's all kinds of scenarios. But let's say things hold together more or less the way they are, kind of, for the next 10 years. Real estate look, interest rates are going up, and that augurs very poorly for me. So the answer to your question is, and there's another thing. Long-term means you're illiquid. And I don't like being illiquid today. It means you're kind of stuck.
Mhm.
So, of course, when you're liquid, you might do something stupid because you're liquid, and you can.
True.
There's all kinds of, look, there's pluses and minuses and pros and cons on all this stuff. But I guess my answer is, I'm not terribly interested in a long-term real estate fund at this point.
The thing that worries me always is that 15 to 25% annualized gains is a lot. Like, that's incredible. That's incredible.
It is.
And you think that there's so much smart money out there trying to find any kind of yield it can anywhere. It's hard to imagine that that can even exist in today's world, where where literally you have BlackRock going and buying, individual houses at, in mass numbers themselves, so just because they're which is a huge effort and is very inefficient for them to do. It's much better for them to just place an order on a Bloomberg terminal or something, right? And buy some securities. So it's like hard to imagine that those kinds of returns can exist in a world where lots of smart capital allocators are trying to squeeze any kind of yield out of anything they can.
Yep, I completely agree. And getting those kind of returns in a 2 or 3% interest rate world are especially extraordinary. And you mentioned BlackRock. This is an amazing story. It used to be everybody would talk about Goldman Sachs, the giant vampire squid, and they've been completely overshadowed by BlackRock, which was only founded in 1988 by a guy named Fink, who still runs it today.
Yep.
So how did they become as super giant as they have? I'd like to know the BlackRock story in more detail.
I know they're conspiracy minded people. They're very involved with the World Economic Forum. I can tell you that much. So they're certainly connected with the the public-private partnership world. That seems to work out really well for people who get involved within it. So they can be part of it. But yeah, I don't really know. But they've certainly infiltrated the key roles in government in the same way that Goldman used to do. And weird. Goldman sort of, no one even talks about him anymore. They faded into the background.
It's amazing. Maybe it's just the narrative and whoever controls it.
That could be it. That could be. Let's see. Someone asked this very broad question, which I don't know how to answer exactly, but he says, what's happening in Uruguay?
Well, essentially nothing's happening in Uruguay. The last thing that has happened in Uruguay, I can tell you about, is that the previous president, who was an ex-Tupamaro revolutionary and dyed-in-the-wool socialist, but kind of an interesting person in some ways, because he still lived in the same house he'd lived in for the last 30 years. It's just a humble little, 1,000-square-foot farmhouse. Okay, so he was bad news while he was president, but not radically bad news, just another socialist. Has been replaced by the new president, whose name is Lacaille Pou, who appears to me, and I could meet him, I will meet him, I'm sure. I've got lots of friends that are friends of his, who, by everything I hear, is a decent human being. And within the context of socialist Uruguay, is free market oriented. And so he'll be in office for at least another 3 years. So Uruguay for the next 3 years is going to be relatively good, I think.
Yeah. And one of the things I really like about Uruguay, and is what you just mentioned about that people know who their leaders are. It's in the US, the leaders are, especially at the national level, are basically like royalty. You don't ever get it. You don't interact with them. You're not going to run into them accidentally at the grocery store. You probably didn't go to school with them. You probably, it's, but
unless you went to a super elite school, that is.
right, exactly. But I mean, the real estate agent that you connected me with in Uruguay is like childhood friends of the current president. They went to school for years and years and years, and she knows him super well. And it's like, that would never happen in the US. This won't happen. And I think that that's a good thing, because they're way more, they have to be more responsive to the populace when they actually are not, surrounded by, 25,000 troops in DC, for instance.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen in Uruguay because their army is essentially non-existent. And what they have that passes for a navy, I've seen the Uruguayan Navy, it's, I don't know, 3 or 4, World War II destroyer escorts, not destroyers, destroyer escorts. So, it's nice. It's not very militaristic. It's not a police state, and of course it's a double-edged sword when a country is not corrupt. But it is a socialist country with lots of welfare benefits and high taxes and lots of annoyances from that point of view. But it really isn't corrupt. You better be really careful and know what you're doing before you try to bribe an Uruguayan official or cop. In Argentina, it's expected. Uruguay, just across the river, not expected. In fact, better not do it.
Okay, what are your views on Singapore? Have you ever traveled there before? And what do you think about the future of Singapore?
Well, I first went to Singapore when? Back in the 70s. And I didn't like it much. I mean, Singapore has an exotic reputation, always has had an exotic reputation, but it was very unimpressive back then. And even subsequently, I thought, I've got no interest in Singapore. It's nothing but a government housing development. They got lots of government housing developments next to a big oil refinery. I mean, forget about it. With, Lee Kuan Yew, who was a genuine dictator who enforced his will upon the society, which is mostly Chinese, but a lot of Indians and Malays also, but mostly Chinese. And so I was unimpressed with Singapore. Well, I was wrong. I should have been impressed. I mean, I was a fan of Hong Kong. I was right there. But Singapore is very expensive and very tightly wrapped, and it's liberalized somewhat over the years since Lee Kuan Yew died. Anyway, nice place to live if you got money.
Yeah, I mean, as an economic center, it's very, very interesting. I think it is. As being just like how your friend Jim, decided if he wanted to expose his children to China and wanted to speak Mandarin. So he was originally planning on living, I believe, in Shanghai, and then also or Beijing, and then ultimately decided that it was just quality of life reasons, etc. He could get almost exactly the same benefits without the downsides by being in Singapore. And so that's where he's been based for the last decade or more, right?
Yeah. And it was a good move. And, my old friend, Robert Friedland, basically lives in Singapore too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So Robert's a multi-billionaire, and he's been everywhere. Robert's passport, it's funny. I mean, back when I was traveling a lot, I thought my passport was thick. And then Robert showed me his passport, and it was that thick. I mean, you couldn't fit all the visa pages that he needed in between the covers. It was amazing. So he's been around the block a few times, and he chose Singapore too. So if you got money, great place to hang out.
All
And
right.
if you
And
saw that, and if you saw that movie, Crazy Rich Asians,
yep.
which Robert produced, incidentally, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the Crazy Rich Asians were in Singapore.
They were. I just wonder if it was Robert trying to, get on equal footing with Frank and that in the film and TV stuff or not. If he's just so competitive, I wonder what his motivation was. Why do that?
I know, it's funny. Well, I think when you have all that money, it becomes almost a cosmic problem what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, I don't have that cosmic problem, and I'm okay with that. I have other cosmic problems though. I think, and everyone does. So let's see. Next question is, what do you think about seasteading?
Fee setting?
Sorry, seasteading.
Oh, seasteading. Gee, I don't know. I hope it works. I mean, I guess as close as I've been involved in that was in the ill-fated Minerva project back in the 70s. That was a typical thing put together by Mike Oliver. I don't know if Mike is even still alive at this point, where they tried to take over some reefs that were above high water at low tide and turn that into a country off of, where was that? This was off of Tonga. So things like that have been tried out on unclaimed reefs in the middle of the ocean. But seasteading, is that basically sailing a boat perpetually around, or is it taking over some reefs, or what is seasteading all about, actually?
I think at this point, the approach to it is that they're taking over abandoned oil platforms. I believe one in the biggest project that I'm aware of, I think it's in the North Sea or somewhere off of England.
Oh, well, that could be. It was a World War II radar tower that was taken over by Prince Roy Bates, who incidentally I spent a day with. Never went out to the tower, but spent a day with Prince Roy and the princess, his wife, back in the 70s. And I guess it still exists. And they use it for, computer stuff that used to be. Yeah, so there's places like that. I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Governments don't like it though. I mean, I remember there was one within the last couple of years that some people tried to set up something in international waters off of Thailand, and the Thai military went after them, and then just destroyed it, and these people were on the run. They're fugitives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can't go. They can't go back to Thailand now because the Thais thought that was violating their national sovereignty. The fact that these people were,
Yeah, so it's risky. I mean, I love the idea of any of these, independent jurisdictions that could be created. I think are a great thing. It's just they don't seem to work that well. At least from what I've seen so far. Someone asked a question that's related to this. They said, what does Doug think about forming a virtual country in cyberspace for those wanting to escape this madness, even if only in our dreams? He says, what does a quote country even need actual land for anyway? Personally, I think Liberland is a joke.
well, is Liberland a joke? Well,
This is what
they do have some. They do have. I'm kind of familiar with the Liberland guys, and I like them. I mean, they're they're good guys, and they do have possession of some land on the Danube River between Croatia and Serbia, which, if one of those two countries decides, game over, we really want this for whatever reasons, it's game over. Well, what's the question? Is it?
Well, I guess the biggest question is, could you just create a country in cyberspace? Is that the only frontier that maybe is not managed, controlled
Yeah,
enough that you could?
that's a problem being in cyberspace, because it turns out that in meat space, that's where they have police, and they come to your house with cars and guns, and then you do what they tell you, or they shoot you, or whatever they do. So that's the problem with being just in cyberspace. You actually need a place in meat space, because that's where we are right now. We're talking in
Right,
cyberspace, but we're present in meat space.
exactly.
So cyberspace is not good enough, I'm afraid.
Okay. What's Doug's take on Salvador becoming a libertarian paradise now that they've made Bitcoin legal tender?
I would have picked Salvador, would have been my last choice for a place to become a beacon of freedom in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horrible little country. I mean, overpopulated and dangerous, and their main export is, gangs, you know. So listen, anything can happen.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a place that's that desperate, maybe, maybe that's when opportunity is created. It certainly is, certainly did. They had to have pissed off a lot of people at like the Bank of International Settlements and the IMF for for basically for making Bitcoin legal tender there. I mean, it had to upset people, which is, I mean, I'm impressed that they were willing to do that. But I guess it'll be interesting to see what comes next.
Well, look, you got to remember Hong Kong, and for that matter, Singapore, and for that matter, Dubai. I mean, all Hong Kong and Singapore, had great ports. Okay. But they had no money, just full of ignorant, almost illiterate Chinese. And they transformed those two cities into the, two of the most successful and dynamic places in the world in a couple of generations. And what happened in Dubai was even more spectacular, quite frankly. I mean, when I first went to Dubai, it was just to go through the airport back in 1980. And the airport was kind of a dump. And the airport was no bigger. It was a little airport, about the size of Aspen's airport. It was nothing. And now I think Dubai probably has the largest airport in the world. And the place is unbelievable what they've done with that. So could the same thing happen to El Salvador? Yes, it could. Because it's happened to, these other
What dynamics would be required, though, if you take those three examples, take Hong Kong, Singapore, and Dubai, and what are the commonalities between what they did that could be applied to make El Salvador, the next Dubai?
Well, I'm not going to say, I would add all kinds of things about personal freedom in there, something which, Singapore is not famous for, and neither is Dubai, quite frankly. But I think it's basically stability and the rule of law. I think in a stable environment, most people are not interested, frankly, except, little personal things. Most people aren't interested in philosophical issues, and that includes personal freedom, and they really don't care. All most people want to do, and it's quite understandable, is just, plant their own garden and watch it grow and not be stolen from, and
Right.
be reasonably safe from the attack of bandits and things like that. So if you create an environment like that, where the taxes are not onerous, which is also a very important thing, the regulations are not onerous, yeah, it'll grow organically. So,
Well,
yeah,
especially the thing about Hong Kong and Singapore, though, is that they had this huge national or natural resource there with their ports that were just, and I don't know if El Salvador has anything like that. You know what I mean? As an anchor that can, because if you have that great natural resource, essentially gives you, and you have a good stability and a good legal framework, good tax structure, low regulations, all that, something interesting has certainly occurred. But without that, I wonder, without having some natural resource. I mean, Dubai had they had oil wealth that they were willing to dump into it. You know what I mean? To like make it something. So huge. One guy could make a decision, the crown prince, to dump huge amounts of personal capital, really, the country's capital, into making that a place that would cater to all kinds of interests, and he could demand the certain legal structure and all that. But the other places had a natural resource, and I just don't know. I wonder if it could be done with just good, stability and a good regulatory framework.
Well, I think it could actually, because in Hong Kong, they didn't have a ruler like Li Ka-shing did in Singapore, who transformed things, or the Sheikh in Dubai. So it was really just the free market that made, under the British aegis, that made Hong Kong what it was. Yeah, I think it could happen in Salvador. What do they have? They've got some seacoasts. They've got some beaches. But other than that, what do they produce there? Coffee and bananas. I don't think anything else that I can think of, frankly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I should look into it more. But it is interesting, and I certainly it's hard to be a nation state and be an innovator today, I think, because of all the pressures that are on you for trade and for with the IMF stuff and all this. So it's cool to see they're doing it, and I hope it's really successful. I really do.
I'm sure the U.S. government is very unhappy about what they're doing, because the U.S. dollar was actually it was just the de facto currency. I think it was the de jure currency of Salvador.
It was, yep. Okay, next question is, what would be a good job for someone in the finance industry to look for when looking to move to a more rural country town?
In the finance industry, country town. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, hard to find a job that would be the same as if you're in New York or something like that. But you theoretically, you'd have some skills that you could use to help small businesses in the area. Like I've seen, and I've even used before with other companies I've had, outsourced CFO services. So basically, people who would make sure that they would do this initial analysis of the business and understanding where we were at, and they make sure that that the accounting and financial information was being delivered properly to me, that my reporting systems all worked, basic from a CFO's perspective, and then it only required somewhat regular check-ins, whether it be once a month or once a quarter. And then when you needed access to capital for whatever reason, or you needed, you were going to take on some debt or whatever, that you had this person who knew your business available to you that you could kind of bring in, and they had some expertise in the area. So I think starting a business like that, is really valuable for growing businesses. And even if you're in whether it's a local farmer who basically has to manage some commodity futures trading just to keep for their business, they just have as part of the business, whether it's serving them in this kind of CFO type part-time capacity, or other small businesses. So I think there's opportunity there, not as a job though. I think you have to create something.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You have to create something. Well, looking to somebody else for a job is the wrong mindset to start with anyway.
Well, and if that wasn't clear before, it sure as hell should be now, when basically, it gets mandated that if your one source of income, or all your whole livelihood is dependent upon, is requiring you to do something that goes against some ethical standard you have. So it just shows that anytime you are dependent upon another party to that extent, you are putting yourself at pretty serious risk. I think so.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you really have to be self-employed. I mean, being somebody else's employee is just a mistake in so many different ways, especially in today's world. In fact, you and I can talk about, we can pontificate about what people should do in these times, but it's kind of easy for you or I to say these things because we don't have jobs. We have capital. We can be inconvenienced by these jerks, but we can avoid it. But people that are still working for somebody else and have not put aside capital, I don't know. That's a tough road to hoe.
It is a tougher situation, but I mean, and I know the longer you put off this decision in your life, to try and become more independent, financially independent, or at least have diversified income sources or whatever, it's hard. But the longer you put it off, the harder it is. And I think that, when I like the last real job I had, not counting the Stansberry stuff, but the last real job I had, I just couldn't stand working for this person anymore. I just couldn't. I just didn't like him. I had different ethical standards, and so I quit. And I was making more than I'd ever made in my life at that point. I was probably 24, 25, but I was making $350,000 a year. And I decided that I was just going to go and do something on my own. And if I made, the way I penciled it out, if I made $40,000 a year, I'd be able to take care of the things that I needed to take care of. But I was, living pretty lean, but it didn't matter. I knew I could live on that much money. And then so I started a business to produce that. And then before the end of the year, it took 6 months. I had actually earned $750,000 because it just took off. It just worked better than I expected, But the decision I made was I'd rather it isn't quite the same ethical decision that people might be facing today about quitting their job. But it was an ethical decision for me when I did it. And I just was like, I'm not going to take it anymore. And it did cost me a lot in the short. I thought it was going to cost me a tremendous amount, changed my life, for the negative for sure. But it ended up working the opposite way. And I could live with myself. I wasn't ashamed by what I did. So I think it was a win all around. But I understand life is hard. Decisions are hard like this.
Actually, I think retro rocking to that era for myself, I didn't make the decision. The decision was made for me. I seem to recall the last 3 actual jobs I had, I got fired from. So.
Well, sometimes it makes it easier. And actually, this whole, these mandates, they can act in the same way. They can basically force, because if you don't do it, they're going to fire you. That is exactly how it's going to work. So if you don't comply, they'll fire you. And maybe that's what people need in order to be able to unleash their own, you got to have some necessity as an entrepreneur to be successful. You have to have a need. It can't just be all about curiosity and seeing what's possible. You need some underlying fundamental need to get you up in the morning and off your ass and pushing through. And I think if you lose your job, I think you'll find it pretty quickly. So
yeah, that's right. Sure.
All right, next question here is, do you think war in Taiwan is likely?
Well, if I was Xi Jinping, I wouldn't attack Taiwan. Just steady as it goes. Why take a chance on the US military doing something stupid to prove that, there's still a force? I'd leave it alone, but I don't know what's on his mind. Well, I know he thinks it's part of China and so forth, but.
Yep, but there's no point in really pushing that forward. Whatever strategy he has going on seems to be fundamentally working. There's some concerns about some internal matters, but fundamentally his foreign policy efforts are working fantastically well. His biggest enemies are being destroyed from within.
Yeah, and the last thing you ever want to do is get involved in a hot war with anybody. I mean, even if they're just primitive natives in Afghanistan, forget about, you know, the United States military. I mean, you just want to avoid that because lots of things are going to get blown up and people are going to get killed and it's going to bankrupt you. So forget about it. Just, steady as it goes. That's what he should do, I think.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Hypothetically, if you were in the US and you knew, but no one else knew, that in 7 days the US dollar would become worthless and the borders would be shut to all people trying to leave, what actions would you take?
Well, I guess that's not quite the situation the Australians have confronted, but if you're an Australian, you're stuck. You can't leave, which is really incredible to me that there's been no worldwide protest. You talk about the borders being closed. Well, wait a minute. What does that have to do with COVID? I mean, if somebody won't let you into their country because they're protecting their citizens against COVID, that's one thing. But what's the reason for not letting you out of the damn country? Has anybody explained this? Have I missed it someplace why the borders closed and people aren't, this is not a subject of discussion.
I think I'm confident it's for their safety, Doug, but other than that, I'm not sure, it has to be for their safety though.
Has to be, although I can't see what the possible relation is. But, well, actually, we may be looking at a situation like that here in the US. We don't know. Some financial accident may occur and creates a force majeure. Who knows? They can do whatever they want. But, at this point, I'm just going to feel mellower watching this as a non-possession of a local government in a small and peaceful and disorganized country than being in the empire where the government treats me as nothing but a pawn in its game. So I guess that answers my question. Yeah, I'd kind of make the move now, frankly. The next 3 years are not going to be good in the US. Cannot be. You've got clinically insane people running the government in Washington, D.C. I mean, look at these people that Biden's appointed. They're all incompetent or Looney Tunes or.
Well, and doesn't seem like there's much sense of restraint, if nothing else. I mean, it just like they're willing to do anything.
They have all the wrong values. They are exactly the same people that took over Russia in 1917. Just a different country, different language, same psychology.
Okay, this is kind of an odd question, but interesting. Who is Doug's favorite former Casey Research analyst?
Well, Casey Research seems to be disappearing before my very eyes. Doesn't bother me. I sold it years ago, and I have no connection with it other than my name is still on the door. Favorite. Well, who do we have? Well, Marin Katusa. I mean, Marin's a superstar when it comes to doing what he does. He's just really, really good.
Yep.
Then we have Louis James, aka Lobo Tigre, and he is diligent, honest, full of Boy Scout virtues. Does a great job too. He's left Casey Research. And then we have E.B. Tucker. He left Casey Research and he doesn't need to work anymore because, of course, he was involved in Matawa and Nova Royalty as a founder in both cases. So EB still, he works because he likes to be productive, but he doesn't have to.
Yep.
So those are 3 ex-Casey Research employees that have, who am I forgetting? Can you think of anybody?
Boy, I mean, there are other ones, but those 3 stand out as being, the ones that Casey Research would be best to have still on the staff, because they were all very dynamic and very interesting people, and that with great ideas.
Yeah, but the best people always jump ship to work for themselves.
That's right.
And especially when it's a big organization, which Casey Research is now owned by Market whatchamacallit, or whatever the company is that.
MarketWise.
Yes, I should know. I'm a shareholder, but completely passive. And so it's a question now, since Casey Research was a free market oriented advisory. That's what it was all about. But now, who works for, well, Nick Giambruno and Dave Forrest are the only two guys that still work for it. And I get the feeling they're both being edged towards the door because, they're just not philosophically lined
compliant.
up.
Yeah, good.
Compliant. So I think the Casey Research, if I was gonna place a money bet, it's the Casey Research is not going to exist in any way, even in name, which suits me fine, incidentally, within a year.
Wow, within a year. Okay.
I'll bet that, just because Nick and Dave are, just two guys. That's not enough for a whole company, really. I don't think.
No, and those guys,
and especially Nick, but they're both non-compliant type personalities, actually.
Exactly, which is frankly, this is exactly the kind of people you want, the non-compliant philosophical types. But
precisely the kind of people you want, exactly.
but senior management typically does not like those people. They get in the way.
No,
they get in the way.
Yeah. Exactly. So at some point, like, who was it that said, I set this company up to be run by an idiot because eventually it will be. And, that's so true.
That is so true. Yep. As soon as the founders leave, founders have all kinds of problems. They have all kinds of quirks that but the business ends up reflecting their personality. The things that they are irrationally dedicated to or irrationally opposed to end up becoming the culture of the company. And then when they leave, the suits take over, and the suits are basically just looking around, concerned about shareholder profits, and basically all the distinguishing characteristics of the company end up just sort of disappearing over time.
Exactly. I mean, look at the great American corporation, General Motors. I mean, eventually it was taken over by people that didn't know anything about cars, didn't even like cars, and they destroyed the largest industrial enterprise in the country. Same thing happens on all scales.
Well, look at GE. GE is the one that always pisses me off, because Jack Welch was the celebrated CEO who, was the best CEO ever. He was proclaimed, around 2000 or early 2000s, late 90s, and I remember I read his biography. It was Jack, straight from the gut. I read it, and I remember thinking, and I was an idiot, and I knew I was an idiot. I know this guy has a lifetime of experience, but I'm reading it and I'm going, this seems like a terrible idea, And basically, what he did is he turned this industrial enterprise, the best in the world, really, that with a long legacy going back to Edison, he turned it into a financial company.
That's right.
And it's just awful, just disgusting. Anyway, but that's what we celebrated. So yeah, that's what happens when the suits get charged. So
yes, I hate suits, and the financialization of the world at large is kind of proof the suits are in control everywhere. It's not about production; it's about accounting profits and
right.
That's different.
Right. It's not about production or innovation, which is where an invention, which is where new things come from, where productivity can vastly improve, and quality of life around the world can get better, which is what I think globalism originally got us, was that innovation and higher levels of productivity and all this other stuff. But then it turned into something that now it's all the innovation is all financial, it seems to me.
I'm not even sure that these suits want any innovation because that might upset the current apple cart, and they don't understand innovation. They're not about that. So they don't want it because it might compromise their high and mighty positions.
Right. Exactly. It's awful. Anyway, just let me just get a couple more questions in here before we wrap it up, because I know we're going a little long. Doug, what do you make of the continued price increases in the luxury collectibles markets like cars, watches, art, etc.? Is this the monetary gains from the rise in assets finding a home outside of fiat, or any other personal insights on that?
Yeah, I think it's part of, I think we're in the early stages or someplace in the phenomenon that Mises described as the crack up boom, where there's all this money, this chasing after stuff, and rise in the price of collectibles is part of it. And it's most apparent to me, he mentioned two things, cars and watches. I've got no interest in watches, quite frankly. I mean, I really don't. But I know a lot of people collect watches for some reason. Okay, it's cool, something to collect. And now they're collecting cars. And they're both dinosaurs, quite frankly. I mean, so yeah, it's a monetary phenomenon, I think.
Okay, last question here. This one is about it's about family in a way. The question is, curious about Doug's view on marriage. He doesn't seem to be a very religious person, because rather than subscribe to a religion, he has his own philosophy or moral code, as I think everyone should. So was marriage merely a way to meld love with the law for Doug? Or even if that's the case, who cares about the law if he can use his assets any way he sees fit? Lots of incoherent thoughts here, but I'm sure you can distill a question out of it.
Yeah, incoherent thoughts, but good thoughts, I think, and shrewd thoughts. So I've always said about marriage, why take a third partner in a relationship between two people, which is to say the state? Once you get their approval and get their license and all this bullshit, now you need their approval in order to divorce, and lawyers get involved because, so from that point of view, yes, I'm very opposed to marriage. On the other hand, notwithstanding all this nonsense about 54 genders or however many there are, there are advantages to two people living together and melding their lives. It's specialization, division of labor. I suppose it can even work between two females and two males, seems to, in many cases, seems to, I don't know. Not opposed to it, certainly not opposed to any kind of marriage legally. Consenting contract between two people. I just don't think the state should have anything to do with it. Don't believe in the Bible. Yes, lots of wisdom in the Bible. Lots of little snippets that, but I don't think anything that Yahweh had to say about marriage and all that is, maybe it's a value, maybe not. Decide for yourself. So marriage. Here's the bottom line. Marriage is primarily an economic proposition. Here in the West, we think in terms of love and this type of thing, voluntary marriage between two people and that. But that's anomalous. In just about all of the rest of the world, marriages are arranged, or if they're not arranged, they're kind of arranged, if not formally. I mean, really. Western civilization is the only civilization where that's not the case, that I can think of anyway, all of them. So, and it's done for economic purposes, to pass on property because it's economically advantageous and so forth. So what do I think about marriage? Well, I don't know. What do you think about marriage at this point?
Which one? Yeah, so I think that I'm a big proponent for family, and and I think of family as you should strive to, with everything with this within your power, to turn family into an institution. And I'm a big believer of that. And that is very difficult to achieve it's actually, I'd say, impossible to achieve without a solid, reliable partnership at the head of it. And that, if legal marriage is part of it that can make that more solid and more reliable and in the eyes of the other participants in this institution, then I'm definitely all for it. But I think that family as an institution is super important. I really believe it is, and I actually think that's a contrarian idea, to even think that family matters anymore, or that, lots of people have this view today that having kids, for instance, is bad. You're destroying the world to have kids, and it's selfish to have kids. And I would say that, well, even if you assume that's true, that it is selfish to have kids and you're destroying the world by having kids, I personally like humans, and I am very pro-human, and I think humans, as they evolve, they have the potential to be beautiful art in and of themselves, like art. And art is done, the artist that makes art always does it for selfish reasons. If it's any good at all, they did it because they wanted to do it, because they were interested in doing it, and go fuck yourself for the other reasons. That's where great art comes from, in my opinion. And I think that's where anything of lasting value or interest are things that are done. Entrepreneurship, like if you start a business because there's a problem you encounter that pisses you off. Like I've started 4 businesses based upon things that just made me angry. It just shouldn't be this way, so I'm gonna try and fix it. And I think that's a selfish act. It is a selfish act, and I think that there's a lot of virtues in selfishness. And if people haven't read that book by Ayn Rand, they really should, because there's a lot of good things there. But so I think marriage, if it supports that institution building, which is a lot like building a great piece of architecture, I think, then it's a living, breathing, and probably going to die at some point piece of architecture. But I think it's totally worth doing.
I think that makes a lot of sense. What about other variations on the theme, like in the Holy Koran, Muhammad, peace be upon him, says that a man can have up to 4 wives as long as he treats them all equally. So does that work out? It seems to have worked out fairly well, because that religion is still around after something like 1,300 years. And look at Mormonism. They started out as they're America's version of Islam in many, many ways, actually. And they had this thing about, was it a maximum
Polygamy.
of 4 wives with the Mormons too?
I think it would depend upon your status within the church, what the limit was, but no, I have no objection to that. Especially if everyone is a willing participant in it, then I don't think there's any issue with that at all. Personally, I don't think that, and again, you don't have to undermine the institution of family by doing that, because that's just the definition of family. It's how you define it. Like, I also think that the idea of the nuclear family is a problem, because I think what it does is it basically it makes it so it's simply a 2-generational environment. And I think that is I think that's not ideal. I think the ideal is that it's a multi-generational influence on things, because, people, when I was 25, like I was a complete moron. And if there would have been, when in the few times that there was a male figure that I respected there, they would just say, hey, listen, this is not going to be a big deal. Just let it go. And somebody who could, who through the institution, I understood was someone who was smarter than me and had a lot of wisdom to share. It provides a great check, not an authoritarian, like controlling check, but just like is a source of wisdom and utility for the rest of the enterprise, the rest of the institution. So I'm a big fan of multi-generational households. I mean, I had this friend in Panama who was one of the families there that's controls everything, and he at 30 still lived with his parents. And I remember making fun of him for it. I'm like, what kind of man lives with his parents when he's 30? And we do this with millennials. We say, you're living in your parents' basement, it's bad. And he goes, well, what are you talking about? It's great. I mean, my mom cooks for me every day, and I have a great relationship with my parents. And then he said, as soon as I get married, that's when I move out then. Like, that's how it works. You get married and then you move out. And but that idea to an American was just totally verboten. You couldn't do that at all. But I mean, it shocked me when I heard his explanation of it, actually. And I go, I obviously, there's a whole other way of thinking about this whole situation. And his family, his grandparents, and his kids, they're all like, they were very close family ties because they don't have this, they haven't set as the highest priority individual economic achievement. And I think that is not the highest priority for all humans, is that. I really believe that, because some people are just, like, why does every woman to feel like she's whole in the world feel like she has to be a VP at JP Morgan? Like, why is, and she'll, it's taking care of your husband is a bad idea, but getting coffee for your boss, making sure it's on his desk at 8:15, that's totally fine. You know what I mean? It's weird.
Maybe not if he's a male, because that would show that you're still under the thumb of the patriarchy.
And they are, and they do that. Like, and I've had a lot of women who work for me who it's like they treat me like better than their husbands. Honestly, they're very kind. I mean, nothing toward it, obviously, but they're very, very thoughtful and generous. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah, it's all strange. I guess when it comes to marriage, my answer would be, well, anything that is voluntary is okay between two people or between four people or whatever. Just, if it's voluntary, it's fine. And as far as what you said about the nuclear family, I think that's an interesting observation, because historically, I mean, families became rather large, and the grandparents and the great-grandparents, if they were around, would still live there and be taken care of and take care of other parts of the family. And it was actually a very intelligent relationship. And this is how clans got built up, where families with cousins and distant cousins were all part of a clan. And yeah, right. Sure.
Well, and for older people, I think our society casts older people aside, because basically once you've retired, you're no longer productively contributing economically to the system. So, you just kind of are cast aside. I think that, and I think a lot of older people would, like, when they stop working, they lose the meaning of their life. Like, there was all around this work that they did and this, the roles that they played. And then, they find themselves, when those are gone, kind of alone. And I remember when this men's group that I went with to you, a couple of them in Aspen, and these guys that were there were all incredibly successful, intelligent, like, impressive people. And yet, they were like, they really were cast aside. I mean, they ran big companies, but where everyone would follow their orders, and like their beck and call. They had all this stuff, and then they have this men's lunch, thank God, that gives them something, to do.
I know that's right, where they can tell each other stories about the good old days. Yeah.
Yeah. But when I was there, and I was talking to these guys, like, I'm like there's so much wisdom in that room. You just ask a couple questions and you learn a lot. I mean, and imagine if their grandchildren thought of them that way. If the situation was set up in such a way that their wisdom was they were not considered old, they were considered lived, that they had something to share. And I think it gives people a purpose in their life. I mean, people live longer when they have young children around. because they can have, it gives them a reason, you know, to try every day. So anyway, I've thought a lot about this stuff. Obviously, I have pretty strong opinions about it, but I definitely think that, you know, breaking us down into these individual atomized economic units really is where I must achieve financial success totally, you know, on my own, for my own, and you must do the same completely, and good luck to you, is like it's a weird form of I don't know, it's maybe mercantilism or something. I don't know. It doesn't make, on an individual level, it doesn't really make that much sense.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I put the source of corruption. What is the actual? Well, we got to talk about the basis of civilization in general and Western civilization in particular. But we've gone on too long today.
We have.
So,
Let's talk about that next week.
okay. All right.
All right. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
man.
Doug. I appreciate it. Take care.
That was a